Somebody call 911. He's stealing my car." The scream cut through the night so sharp that even the crickets went silent. I turned before I understood what I was hearing. Vanessa Hale was standing in the middle of the street barefoot, robe flying, phone shaking in her hand. Streetlights bounced off the screen of her phone and off the silver badge of the HOA she wore on her wrist like a crown. "That's him," she yelled. "He's in my garage right now. Black jacket. He's stealing my charger." Her voice cracked the calm suburb in half. For a moment I couldn't even move. The remote was still warm in my hand. Behind me the garage door was half open, light spilling over polished metal. My 1970 Dodge Charger sat inside, black paint shining like oil under a white moon. My fingerprints were still fresh on the hood, and yet here I was, accused of stealing the one thing I had spent 18 months rebuilding from dust and rust. The first siren came fast. Then another. Red and blue washed over the houses like fire and water fighting each other. The sound bounced off every driveway until the whole block woke up. Curtains shifted. Dogs barked. And I stood there, in my own driveway, keys in my pocket, watching two cruisers slide to a stop at the curb. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." The younger officer moved first, one hand near his holster. The older one looked tired, like he'd seen every version of this movie before. I raised both hands slowly. "This is my car," I said. "I live here." Behind them, Vanessa kept performing. Her eyes were wide and glassy, voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "I just bought that car from a collector in Phoenix," she said. $45,000. They delivered it tonight. He broke into my garage to take it." The older cop turned toward her. "Ma'am, do you have paperwork?" "It's being processed," she said. Of course it was. Everything about her was always being processed. Perfect nails, perfect house, perfect lies. I nodded toward my workbench. "Officer, I can prove ownership right now." I handed him a thick binder. Every photo, every receipt, every bit of sweat I'd poured into that car was inside. He flipped through the pages. His eyebrows rose as he saw the first picture. The rusted skeleton I'd towed home 18 months ago. Then the next one. The bare frame, primered panels, rebuilt engine. Then the finished body, paint so deep you could drown in it. "You rebuilt this yourself?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Paid cash for the frame at an estate sale. $3,200. I have the bill of sale." I showed him the folded yellow paper still stained with oil fingerprints from the day I bought it. The officer compared the VIN on the paper to the one on the car. Then he looked at Vanessa. "Ma'am, it matches. The car is registered to Mr. Carter." Her mouth opened, then closed. Color drained from her face. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. "That can't be right." "Ma'am," the older cop said, "filing a false police report is serious." The younger one exhaled. "You're clear, sir." I nodded, but my hands still trembled. Not from fear, from disbelief. I'd just been seconds away from being arrested in my own driveway. When the cruisers left, the neighborhood lights went out one by one. Vanessa stood at her window staring at me like she was memorizing my face, and I knew it wasn't over. She wasn't the type to lose quietly. The next morning, a yellow envelope waited in my mailbox. Notice of violation. Unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. $200 fine. 48 hours to comply. Signed, Vanessa Hale. Through my kitchen window, I saw her jogging past my house, phone in hand, pretending not to look my way. She slowed down at my driveway, frowned at my work van, then kept running. It wasn't curiosity. It was strategy. By the end of the week, 3 more letters arrived. Oil stains on the driveway, noise complaints, chemical odors, each one more ridiculous than the last. I cleaned the concrete until it shone. I replaced every noisy tool I owned. Still, the envelopes kept coming. It stopped being harassment. It started to feel like war. That weekend, I installed 4 cameras around my house. High definition, night vision, cloud storage. If she wanted a fight, I would keep every frame of it. The first footage came 3 nights later. Vanessa in her yoga pants at 2 in the morning, measuring tape in hand, pacing the edge of our property line, taking photos, writing notes, The kind of behavior that looks harmless until you realize it never stops. I watched the clip twice, then saved it to a secure drive. I didn't send it anywhere yet. Let her dig her own hole first. On Monday, the next letter arrived. Emergency HOA board meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m., mandatory attendance. Posted that morning, same-day meeting. Classic ambush. When I entered the community hall, she was already seated at the head of the table. 2 board members beside her. Both looked uncomfortable, like they'd been dragged there. Vanessa smiled without warmth. "Mr. Carter, we're implementing a new rule tonight. No mechanical work or vehicle maintenance in any residential garage." Immediate effect, I folded my arms. That's not legal. The bylaws require 7 days' notice for a vote. Her smile tightened. "We can make emergency exceptions." I took a step closer to the table. "You also need 5 board members for a quorum. I count 3. The other 2 exchanged glances. Vanessa's voice rose a notch. "You think you can come into this neighborhood and ignore our rules?" "I think I'm reading the contract you made everyone sign," I said. The air turned heavy. Even the fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Finally, she gathered her papers and stood. "This meeting is adjourned." She left before anyone could say another word. The next morning, another envelope arrived. But this time it wasn't from the HOA. It was from City Code Enforcement. Anonymous complaint. Unlicensed commercial repair business operating from residence. The next morning, the knock on my door came early. The kind of knock that doesn't belong to a friend. When I opened it, a man in a city windbreaker stood there holding a clipboard and a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ethan Carter?" he asked. "I'm with Cedar Ridge Code Enforcement. We received an anonymous complaint about an unlicensed auto repair business operating from this address." His voice was polite, but there was weight behind it. The kind of tone people use when they've had to deal with too many angry homeowners already. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. "You're welcome to look." He followed me into the garage, and I could tell immediately that he wasn't expecting what he saw. Everything gleamed. Tools were lined up by size and function. The concrete floor spotless except for the faint shadow of the Charger's tires. The air smelled like fresh oil and steel, not chaos. "Jesus," he said softly. "This is cleaner than most professional shops." I couldn't help but smile a little. "That's because it's not a shop. Just me and my weekends." He made a few notes, checked the space again, then looked up. "You don't take customers here?" "No, I work for Ridgeway Auto downtown. This is just personal." He nodded, closed his clipboard, and sighed. "Well, that settles that. You'd be surprised how many of these anonymous complaints we get from this neighborhood. Same voice every time, guessing yours came from the same person." He didn't have to say her name. We both knew it. Vanessa Hale. As he left, he turned back on the porch, 1 foot already on the step. "Off the record," he said, "I document everything. Some people don't know when to stop." I spent the rest of that day waiting for whatever she would try next. It didn't take long. 3 days later, I got a call from my insurance company. They wanted to schedule an urgent inspection of my property due to a fire hazard complaint. The representative sounded confused, like she already suspected it was nonsense, but policy required a site visit. When the inspector arrived, he didn't look like a man coming to find problems. He looked like someone on a field trip. Within minutes, he was crouched beside the Charger, admiring the engine like it was a piece of art. "Whoever reported you," he said finally, "doesn't know a damn thing about safety. This setup's better than most commercial garages. I'll be filing a clean report." "Appreciate it," I told him, though what I really felt was exhaustion. Each attack was the same. Faceless paperwork designed to wear me down, to make me second-guess myself, to convince me it would be easier to leave than to fight. But I wasn't leaving. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by letters, photos, copies of HOA bylaws, and a folder labeled Hail. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't want to believe I needed it. But I did, because when you deal with people like Vanessa, you learn that reason means nothing. You have to speak the language they understand. Proof, persistence, exposure. By the end of the week, she'd taken her campaign online. A new group appeared on the neighborhood social network, Cedar Ridge Watch. Its cover photo was a perfect drone shot of our community, and the first post came from none other than Vanessa herself. Concerned about the direction of our neighborhood, she wrote. Some residents seem to be using their garages for industrial purposes, which threatens property values for all of us. There was a photo attached. My driveway, my van, my garage door half open. The comments came fast. Some neighbors offered support, others asked questions, and a few defended me outright. Within a day, the thread turned toxic, half the community arguing with the other half while Vanessa deleted every comment that didn't align with her narrative. It was like watching a wildfire through glass. Bright, messy, unstoppable. But she didn't realize she was building me allies. People she'd annoyed, fined, or humiliated over the years were quietly reaching out. One of them was Tom, the mail carrier who lived 3 doors down. He knocked on my door that Friday afternoon, hat in hand, voice low. "Mind if I come in? I think it's time we talk about her." We sat over coffee, and for the first time I heard stories that made mine sound almost tame. Families fined for mailbox fonts, for leaving kids' bikes on the sidewalk, for holiday lights that weren't community standard. Tom laughed without humor. "She's been doing this for years. Most people just move out to get away." "Not me," I said. He nodded. "Good, because you might be the one who finally stops her." That night I backed up every file I had, uploaded all the footage, scanned every document. By the time the sun rose, my living room looked like a war room. Maps, notes, printouts taped to the walls, and then something happened that changed everything. The next morning, while checking the cameras, I noticed movement near the garage around 2 a.m. A figure in dark clothes crouched by my driveway, scattering something small and metallic. I zoomed in. Nails, dozens of them. She'd crossed from harassment to sabotage. I called the police. Officer Morgan arrived within 20 minutes. He'd been there the night of the 911 call. He didn't bother hiding the disbelief on his face when I showed him the footage. "Classic intimidation tactic," he said. "Document everything. If this keeps up, we'll have enough to press charges." I thanked him, but inside I felt something shifting. Fear giving way to anger, because now it wasn't just me she was targeting. It was my home, my safety. Over the next week, more neighbors came forward. Sarah, who worked in accounting, had been fined for her flower beds. Mike, a lawyer, for using the wrong fence stain. Linda, a teacher, for hanging a wind chime deemed distracting. Each story sounded the same. Intimidation, fines, humiliation. Together we started comparing dates, violation letters, and payment records. The pattern emerged fast. Vanessa wasn't just enforcing rules. She was profiting from them. Tom discovered something that made our blood run cold. HOA payments were being routed through a management company that didn't exist in state records. Hale Property Solutions, registered to her home address. We had her, but proof needed power, and power required unity. So we built it. Every night we met quietly at Tom's house, piecing together the puzzle. Sarah analyzed bank statements. Mike drafted legal notices. I handled the digital evidence. The deeper we dug, the darker it got. Fraudulent invoices, fake landscaping contracts, inflated maintenance fees. She'd stolen nearly $100,000 from the community over 3 years. And now, backed into a financial corner, she'd turned her obsession toward me. The distraction she needed while she covered her tracks. What she didn't know was that we were building a case stronger than anything she could imagine. The plan was simple. Let her think she was still winning. Keep collecting. Wait until the evidence was airtight, and when she finally went too far, we'd be ready. The following week moved like a storm hiding behind sunlight. On the surface, everything in Cedar Ridge looked normal. Lawns still glowed under sprinklers, kids still rode their bikes to the park, and Vanessa still waved at everyone with that perfect, rehearsed smile. But beneath that calm there was tension humming through every street like a wire ready to snap. Inside Tom's house we met every evening. The blinds stayed shut, the lights low, the kitchen table covered in files. Sarah cross-checked payment ledgers while Mike compared the HOA's transactions to public property records. Every time we found another gap or fake expense, it was like uncovering another brick in a wall she had built to hide what she was doing. Vanessa must have felt the pressure because she began moving faster. New notices appeared on doors almost daily, most of them for things that made no sense at all. A lawn that was too green, a mailbox that didn't match neighborhood tone, a bird feeder that invited pests. She was losing control of her story and trying to grab it back by flooding everyone with paper. One night I drove through the neighborhood after midnight and saw her car parked by the clubhouse. The building lights were on, even though the place was supposed to close at 10. Through the window I could see her pacing with her phone to her ear, files spread out across the table. She looked smaller than she ever had, like someone fighting an invisible tide. I didn't hate her. Not then. What I felt was something colder. Curiosity about how far she'd go before the facade cracked completely. The next morning, a new rumor started circulating through the community board. The HOA was investigating me for tax fraud. It was ridiculous, but it told me she was getting desperate. That night I called Mike. He said to stay patient, that every lie she spread was another piece of evidence showing intent. Still, patience has limits. 3 days later, I came home to find a city utility truck outside my house and a notice taped to my door, claiming that my property lines were under review due to potential encroachment. The man inside the truck looked embarrassed when I approached him. He said someone had called in a complaint about my fence being 2 inches over the line. He already knew it wasn't true. The survey markers were clear. He closed his tablet and said he'd note the inspection as resolved. I thanked him, but after he left I stood staring at that fence for a long time. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about obsession. Later that night I added the new footage to my archive. Cameras caught her again, walking near the edge of my driveway, stopping to stare at the garage door as if she could see through it. I watched the recording twice, then shut it off. I wasn't scared of her anymore, just tired. At the next secret meeting, we agreed it was time to push back quietly. Sarah prepared a full audit summary showing every missing payment. Mike drafted a letter requesting an independent financial review of the HOA's accounts. Tom and I started reaching out to other residents one by one, explaining what we had found without revealing too much. The idea wasn't to attack her yet. It was to gather enough people who would support an open vote when the time came. Days passed, tension building like pressure in a sealed engine. Vanessa must have sensed it because she started holding her own community gatherings, claiming she wanted to address misinformation. We didn't attend, but some neighbors recorded them. In those videos, her voice carried the same brittle confidence as a wall with cracks spreading beneath fresh paint. The moment everything shifted came a week later. Tom arrived at my door with a flash drive. He said he had finally tracked the bank transfers from the fake management company to her personal account. Not once, not twice, but over 20 times. It was enough to end her presidency and start a criminal case. We agreed to meet the following evening to finalize the packet before submitting it to the State Housing Commission. But that night, something unexpected happened. At 2:15 a.m., I woke to a faint grinding noise outside. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I heard metal scraping against metal. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the camera feed, and saw a dark figure crouched by the charger. The hood was half open, tools glinting under a flashlight. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I didn't rush out. I hit record and called Morgan, the officer who'd helped me before. He said to stay inside, that a patrol was already nearby. 2 minutes later, flashing lights washed through the window again. The person by the car froze, then turned. It was Vanessa. Her face looked hollow in the light like she hadn't slept in days. The officers approached carefully, spoke to her for a long moment, then led her toward the cruiser. She wasn't arrested then, just taken in for questioning. But by sunrise, everyone in Cedar Ridge knew something had happened. She came back late the next afternoon, driving fast, ignoring everyone. The moment her car door slammed, she disappeared inside her house and didn't come out for 2 days. For the first time, the neighborhood was quiet without her. We used that quiet. By the end of the week, the evidence packet was in the hands of state investigators. The board received an emergency notice calling for an audit, and every resident got a letter from the commission asking for statements. It wasn't public yet, but it was in motion, unstoppable now. I didn't celebrate. I just sat in my garage beside the Charger, the smell of oil and steel surrounding me, and listened to the faint hum of the house settling in the evening heat. Everything felt still, like the air before a storm finally breaks. By the time the letters from the Housing Commission arrived, the air in Cedar Ridge felt heavier, like everyone could sense the shift even if they didn't know why. People stood longer at their mailboxes that morning, eyes scanning the same official seal, and by afternoon the whispers had spread from one cul-de-sac to the next. Something was wrong with the HOA, something big. I was in the garage wiping down the Charger when Tom called. He didn't sound excited. He sounded relieved. The commission had opened a formal inquiry. Every board member had been ordered to turn over financial records within 72 hours. Vanessa's name was on the notice, bold and unmistakable. By sunset, the neighborhood board chat had gone silent. For months, it had been a stream of reminders, fines, and little power plays. Now it was nothing but quiet dots on a screen. I watched that stillness with the same feeling you get right before thunder breaks. The next morning, 2 unmarked sedans rolled up to the clubhouse. Suits got out carrying briefcases and clipboards. They moved with the calm rhythm of people who already knew the answers to the questions they were about to ask. Vanessa followed them a few minutes later. She was dressed perfectly as always, but her hair looked rushed, and she didn't make eye contact with anyone. I stayed on my porch pretending to check the mailbox while the inspectors disappeared inside. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When they left, she didn't walk them out. She stood behind the glass door, watching as they drove away. By evening, every neighbor who had ever crossed her found an email waiting. Notice of a temporary suspension of HOA activities pending review. No new fines, no new enforcement. For the first time in years, Cedar Ridge felt free. But she wasn't done. Power doesn't die quietly. 2 nights later, the motion sensors caught movement near the clubhouse again. I pulled up the feed and saw her through the windows, pacing, typing on her laptop, boxes piled on the table. She was printing something, pages spilling across the floor like she was trying to rewrite the past before morning came. At dawn, a moving truck arrived. She loaded boxes into it herself. No helpers, no goodbye. Just silence, the thud of cardboard hitting metal, the screech of tape pulled across seams. Then she drove away. Most people thought she was leaving town. I knew better. People like Vanessa don't run. They regroup. The investigators came back that afternoon, this time with 2 uniformed officers. They carried out computers, file boxes, and the HOA's entire archive. By the end of the day, the clubhouse was empty, a hollow shell echoing with the sound of its own ventilation. That night, Tom knocked on my door again. He said the commission had thanked him for our cooperation, that the case would move forward to the district attorney. There was talk of fraud, embezzlement, misuse of community funds. He looked tired, but lighter somehow, like someone who had finally stopped holding his breath. When he left, I sat on the front steps watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The neighborhood was quiet again, truly quiet this time. No clipped footsteps, no surveillance stares, no sudden envelopes in the mailbox. Just ordinary silence, the kind you forget to appreciate until it comes back. It started with a headline. 3 days after the investigators cleared out the clubhouse, every phone in Cedar Ridge lit up with the same notification. The local news station had run the story. Homeowners Association president under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Beneath the headline was a photo of Vanessa, the same picture she used for her real estate ads, now framed by words that stripped the polish away. The article detailed everything: the fake management company, the missing funds, the anonymous complaints she'd filed to distract people, even the falsified invoices. Reading it felt strange, like looking at a map of something I already knew but finally seeing it drawn in ink. By mid-morning, the story was everywhere. Cars slowed near her house. People stood in clusters at the end of driveways whispering, voices low but urgent. Nobody had seen her since the night she loaded the boxes into the truck, and now everyone wondered whether she'd come back at all. Tom stopped by around noon, holding a copy of the newspaper. He didn't say much, just handed it to me and looked out at the street. For months we'd lived under her rules, afraid of what she might do next. Now it was over, and the quiet felt unreal. That afternoon, 2 police cruisers parked outside her house. The officers didn't use their sirens. They walked up calmly, knocked once, then waited. She opened the door a few seconds later. The cameras caught everything. The same news crew that had broken the story was parked across the street, lenses trained on the porch. She didn't resist. She spoke to them for a while, her face pale, eyes unfocused, then let them lead her to the car. The door closed softly behind her, and the sound of it echoed down the street like a final period at the end of a long sentence. The next day, the Housing Commission issued a statement confirming what we'd found: over $100,000 misappropriated, falsified records, and a long list of violations. The board was dissolved. A temporary committee of residents was appointed until new elections could be held. For the first time, Cedar Ridge belonged to its people again. That evening, neighbors who had barely spoken for months came out of their houses. Someone brought a radio. Someone else brought food. Kids ran through the lawns like the place had been unchained. Nobody said Vanessa's name, but everyone felt the same unspoken relief. I stayed back near the garage, watching it all. The Charger sat under the porch light, clean and quiet, the same car that had started everything. Sometimes I still replayed that night in my head, the sirens, the lights, the accusation, but it didn't sting anymore. It felt like a story that had happened to someone else. Later, as the street emptied and the last voices faded, I walked down to the edge of the cul-de-sac. The air was warm and still. Across the road, her house sat dark, windows covered, a for sale sign leaning crooked in the yard. I thought about how small her world had become. All that control, all those rules, and in the end it had collapsed into silence. I turned back toward home, and for the first time since moving to Cedar Ridge, it actually felt like home. For a few weeks, Cedar Ridge stayed quiet. The lawns grew without warnings taped to doors, mailboxes overflowed with flyers instead of fines, and people began to talk to one another again. On the surface, it looked like peace. But underneath, everyone knew the story wasn't finished. Investigations don't stop when the cameras leave. They just go quiet for a while. A month after the arrest, 2 state investigators came back to the neighborhood. They met with the temporary committee and spent hours in the clubhouse, piecing together what was left of the HOA's records. When they called me in, they wanted background: how the complaints started, when the harassment began, what I had documented. I gave them everything. Every file, every recording, every late-night photo of Vanessa pacing in front of my house. They listened without interrupting, taking notes, sometimes shaking their heads. One of them, a woman named Reyes, said something that stuck with me. She said that people like Vanessa never start with money. They start with control. The money just comes later, once they learn what control can buy. By the end of that week, the investigators had connected her to other communities across the state. Each one had the same pattern: fake management contracts, disappearing funds, and a trail of people who had moved away quietly instead of fighting back. Cedar Ridge had been lucky. We caught it before it hollowed the place out completely. The news stations came back for follow-ups, but nobody wanted to be on camera anymore. We were tired of being the headline. We just wanted normal life. The new committee began holding open meetings in the park instead of behind the clubhouse doors. They asked for volunteers, and somehow I ended up helping with maintenance planning. It wasn't glamorous work, sorting out repair budgets, rechecking vendor contracts, but it felt like the right way to close the circle. Some evenings, after everyone else left, I'd stay a little longer, walking the paths Vanessa had once patrolled. The place looked smaller now. The fences, the neat rows of hedges, the identical houses, all of it had been part of her illusion of control. Without her, the sameness felt harmless again. One Friday, I ran into Tom at the grocery store. He told me Vanessa had accepted a plea deal: restitution, probation, community service. No trial, no long sentence. He seemed angry at first, then just resigned. I said it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that people finally saw her for who she was. Later that night, I found myself sitting in the garage again, the Charger's engine idling low, the lights casting soft shadows on the walls. For months, that sound had meant escape. Now it just sounded like calm. I thought about how the whole thing had started, with a shout in the dark and a lie about a stolen car. It seemed impossible that such a small spark could have burned through so many lives. Still, the neighborhood wasn't the same. People were wary now. The new board was fair, but every decision carried echoes of the old days. Every letter in a mailbox made people glance twice before opening it. Trust takes longer to rebuild than fences or finances. One evening in early spring, I was closing the garage when I saw a familiar car slowing near the cul-de-sac. It wasn't hers. The plate was different, but the same model, same color. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened. Then the car kept going, turning toward the main road, taillights fading into the dusk. That's when I realized what had changed most. I wasn't afraid of her anymore, or of anyone like her. I'd seen what happens when fear and silence take over a community, and I knew now that the only thing that ever breaks that grip is people standing together. I shut the garage door, the sound echoing through the still air, and went inside. On the table lay the final letter from the Housing Commission, officially closing the case. It said the association had been recertified, that Cedar Ridge Estates was now in good standing. Simple words, but they felt heavier than they looked. Outside, the neighborhood lights blinked on one by one. Somewhere, a sprinkler hissed. The same sounds as always, but this time they belonged to all of us again. 6 months passed before I saw her name again. By then, Cedar Ridge had settled into a rhythm that almost felt normal. The new board handled maintenance and budgets without drama. Lawns stayed green, and nobody argued about mailbox colors anymore. People still mentioned her sometimes, but mostly in past tense, like a bad dream that had finally lost its teeth. One morning, an envelope showed up in every mailbox. It looked official. Heavy paper, clean logo, embossed lettering. Hale Consulting Group. The tagline said they specialized in community recovery and compliance management. Most people didn't notice the irony. I did. I opened the pamphlet on the workbench while coffee steamed beside the Charger. The writing style was unmistakable. Polished, friendly, promising order through structure. At the bottom was a name that made my stomach turn. V. H. Spencer, Director. Different last name, same initial. By noon, half the neighborhood was talking about how some company was offering free workshops on efficient HOA management. Tom called me first. He said it couldn't be her. The court order barred Vanessa Hale from serving on any homeowner's board for 5 years. I told him paper bans don't stop people who never learn to stop themselves. The workshop was scheduled for Saturday morning at the community center. I went early and waited in the parking lot. A white SUV pulled up 10 minutes before start time. She stepped out wearing sunglasses and a navy suit, hair shorter now, smile identical. She didn't even glance my way. Inside, she stood at the front of the room with a projector and a stack of handouts talking about accountability and transparency. Her voice carried that same careful rhythm, the one that made everything sound reasonable. The neighbors nodded along, unaware that the person promising to teach them honesty had spent years perfecting the opposite. I sat in the back, taking notes. Her slides listed new company names, vendors, maintenance firms, auditing partners. I recognized 2 of them from old invoices she had forged. Different logos, same registration numbers buried deep in the fine print. That night, I sent photos to Reyes, the investigator. She called the next day, her voice tight. She said they were already watching one of those companies. The fraud trail hadn't stopped with Cedar Ridge. Vanessa wasn't working alone anymore. For a few weeks, nothing happened. She kept hosting sessions, winning people over, turning suspicion into admiration. Flyers appeared on bulletin boards. Neighbors started saying maybe she'd changed. Maybe everyone deserved a second chance. I didn't argue. I just kept recording. Every presentation, every flyer, every company she mentioned went into a file labeled Echo. One evening, around dusk, I noticed a car idling outside my house. The windows were tinted, but the license plate glinted under the streetlight. Same Hale Consulting fleet tag I'd seen on her SUV. It stayed for 10 minutes, then rolled away. When I checked the camera later, I saw her driver lean out to take a photo of my driveway. That was the moment I knew she'd seen me at the workshop. The next day, my mailbox was open. Nothing was missing, but the lock was bent as if someone had tested it. Across the street, a for sale sign appeared in front of an empty house. The listing agent was one of her former business partners from Phoenix. The pattern was back. Quiet, careful, legal on the surface, rot underneath. I met Tom and Sarah that night in the same kitchen where we'd planned the first investigation. We agreed to stay calm, collect data, and alert the state before confronting her. Still, part of me wondered if this time she'd go further than before. People like Vanessa learn from failure. They adapt. 2 nights later, I followed her SUV from a distance as it left the subdivision. She drove to an office park on the edge of town, lights still on in a second-floor suite. Through the glass, I could see her meeting with 2 men. They passed a folder across the table, shook hands, and she smiled that perfect realtor smile again. I didn't get closer. I didn't need to. The camera zoom caught the sign beside the door, Hale Group Regional Finance Division. She wasn't rebuilding a life. She was rebuilding a network. When I sent the footage to Reyes, she said to keep quiet for now. The state wanted to trace every connection before they moved. They thought the fraud stretched across 3 counties. She warned me to be careful, to stay visible, not alone. That night, I parked the Charger in the garage and locked the doors twice. The engine ticked as it cooled, echoing through the quiet like a clock counting down. Outside, the streetlights flickered. Somewhere, a car door shut softly, and I couldn't tell if it was real or just my nerves catching up to what I already knew. The war in Cedar Ridge wasn't over. It had just changed shape. I didn't plan to leave Cedar Ridge again. The place finally felt quiet, almost clean. But curiosity has a way of finding cracks in peace. The night after Reyes called, I spread the printouts across the workbench. Contracts, business filings, addresses. 3 of the shell companies shared the same registered agent. All 3 were tied to an office park 2 hours south in Mesa Valley. At sunrise, I packed a camera, a thermos of coffee, and the old binder I'd used the first time this all began. The road out of town was lined with pine and fog. For a while, it felt like I was driving out of a dream, the Charger's engine steady and low beneath the hum of the tires. Mesa Valley wasn't much to look at. Strip malls, storage units, half-finished developments. The address on the filings led me to a bland 2-story building with mirrored windows. A small plaque by the door read Hale Group Regional Finance. The parking lot was half full. I sat there for 20 minutes watching employees drift in carrying coffee cups and folders. None of them looked like Vanessa. When I finally went inside, the lobby smelled of new paint and air freshener. A young receptionist looked up from behind a glossy counter. She smiled, professional and empty, the way people do when they've been told to smile for a living. I said I was there about a consulting proposal, mentioned a fake name I'd pulled from one of the invoices. She typed something into her screen, nodded, and asked me to wait. While she made a call, I looked around. The walls were covered with photos of suburban neighborhoods, identical streets, identical lawns, identical slogans about community integrity. Every picture looked like Cedar Ridge. A man in a gray suit came out a few minutes later, introduced himself as operations manager. His handshake was dry and quick. We walked through glass doors into a hall lined with offices. Each door had the same template plaque: regional compliance, vendor liaison, data auditing. Behind one door, I saw a nameplate turned slightly sideways. It read, V. Spencer. He guided me past without noticing that my eyes stopped there. I caught a glimpse through the glass, just an empty chair and a tablet glowing on the desk. In his office, we talked about nothing for 10 minutes: property valuations, HOA trends, management software. He asked what company I represented. I said I was collecting data for a maintenance vendor. When I mentioned Cedar Ridge, he froze for half a second, then smiled again too quickly. "Ah, yes," he said, "one of our legacy clients." That told me enough. When I left, I circled the building once, parked across the street, and waited. At 4 in the afternoon, the side door opened. Vanessa stepped out carrying a briefcase, hair pulled back, glasses now framing the same eyes that once watched me from across a manicured lawn. She looked right past the Charger, got into a black sedan, and drove off toward the highway. I followed at a distance, heart steady but alert. She took the freeway north, past industrial parks, and into the city. The sun was low, turning every windshield into a mirror. Finally, she turned off near the River District and pulled into an underground garage beneath a luxury condo building. I stayed above, parked across from the entrance. For nearly an hour, I watched the elevator lights in the lobby windows rise and fall. When they stopped at the top floor and stayed there, I knew that was her place. The file addresses had listed a consultant suite, registered to the same floor. I didn't need to get any closer that night. I had proof she was still running the network. Back at a cheap motel outside the city, I sent everything to Reyes: photos, timestamps, the video of her leaving the Mesa Valley office. Her reply came 20 minutes later. She said the department was moving quietly, building a case that reached across multiple counties. She told me again to keep my distance. But distance is hard when you've spent a year living inside someone else's lies. I lay awake listening to traffic wash through the thin walls, thinking about how control works. It's never about power in one place. It's about replication, copying the same design until it owns everything it touches. Cedar Ridge was just a prototype. In the morning, I drove back through the fog, the Charger rumbling low, the road stretching ahead like a thread pulling me home. The mountains were blue on the horizon and the air smelled of rain. Somewhere behind me, Vanessa Hale, V.H. Spencer, consultant, survivor, manipulator, was already drafting the next version of her empire. I wasn't sure how it would end this time, but I knew one thing: I wasn't just a mechanic anymore. I was the one who had seen the pattern, and patterns only end when someone decides to break them. Back in Cedar Ridge, the streets looked calm, almost too calm. The air smelled of wet asphalt, the kind that clings to your shoes after rain. I parked the Charger and sat with the engine off, listening. Nothing, just sprinklers ticking somewhere in the dark. I sent the new footage to Reyes. Then I waited. Hours passed, no reply. Normally, she answered in minutes. When her message finally came, it was short: "Good work, stay put," and written in a tone that didn't sound like her. Too polished, too official. Next morning, I opened my laptop to review the files I'd uploaded. 2 were gone. The timestamps still showed the uploads, but the videos were blank. Someone had accessed my drive at 3:14 a.m. from an encrypted state server. Reyes was the only one with that clearance. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. By noon, a black sedan rolled through the neighborhood, same model I'd seen outside the Mesa Valley office. It slowed near my driveway, lingered, then kept going. Tom came by that evening asking if I'd heard the rumor. The state had closed the investigation. Official statement. Insufficient evidence to pursue further action. My stomach dropped. We had hundreds of pages of proof. Something was wrong. That night I drove to the city. The Hale Group building was dark except for one window on the second floor. Through the glass I saw movement. Someone at Reyes's desk. She was supposed to be out of town. I stayed parked across the street watching the glow of the monitor. When the screen flickered, I caught a glimpse of a document header: Cedar Ridge. Internal disposition. My own name was on the next line. the elevator light came on. I slipped out of the car, kept to the shadows, heart hammering against my ribs. A man stepped out first carrying a briefcase. Then Reyes. They didn't speak, just exchanged a nod and walked separate ways. I followed her to the parking lot. She stopped by a gray SUV, glanced over her shoulder once like she knew someone was watching, then drove off toward the highway. Back at the motel, I replayed everything. The timeline didn't fit. She'd told me she was stationed 2 counties away, yet she'd been there, working with someone from Hale Group. Either she'd switched sides, or she'd never left. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single text. Stop sending files. You're in the wrong lane. No name. No signature. I didn't sleep. I organized everything again, copied the backups onto a clean drive, locked it inside the tool chest under the Charger's hood. If they wanted to bury evidence, they'd have to tear apart every bolt I'd ever turned. 2 days later, an unmarked envelope appeared at my door. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement with the state seal. No cover letter, no explanation. Just a line at the bottom. Case Nugger 47219, closed by authority of Investigator Reyes. She'd shut it down herself. That evening, I drove to her listed office downtown. The receptionist said she'd been reassigned weeks ago. No forwarding contact, no phone, nothing. The department database listed her as inactive, administrative leave. She'd vanished. The next day, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. You're not the only one watching. I didn't know if it was a warning or an invitation. Night after night, I kept seeing that black sedan. Sometimes in the mirror, sometimes parked half a block behind. It never followed for long, just enough to remind me it was there. The pattern felt familiar. The pressure, the silence, the careful removal of truth. Only this time it wasn't an HOA president hiding behind bylaws. It was someone wearing a badge. I started documenting again. Every sighting, every message, every call that rang once and cut off. The deeper I looked, the more I found traces of Reyes's work reaching past Cedar Ridge. Identical cases. Identical closures. Different towns. Same signatures. Maybe Vanessa hadn't corrupted her. Maybe they'd both been part of something larger from the start. One night, just before dawn, a delivery truck stopped at my house. No logo. The driver left a small package on the porch and drove away without looking back. Inside was a single USB drive and a note. You wanted the truth. Don't open this here. I sat there with it in my hand, the sky turning pale outside the window, the Charger's reflection ghosted in the glass. I didn't know if the drive held proof or a trap. Either way, I'd already crossed the line. The USB sat on the table like a live wire. Small, harmless, too quiet. I waited until dark, closed the curtains, and slid it into a clean laptop I'd never used online. The screen flickered once, then filled with folders. Each one had a date. Each one carried a name I recognized: Cedar Ridge, Mesa Valley, Brookstone Heights, all the towns tied to Vanessa's consulting work. Inside were documents, scanned IDs, invoices, payment ledgers, but what stopped me were the signatures. Not hers, Reyes's, every closure report, every case dismissal, every insufficient evidence notice, signed by the same hand. My throat tightened. She hadn't been corrupted by Vanessa. She'd been building the entire system. Vanessa was just the public face. Reyes handled the paperwork, the fake investigations, the legal cleanup. There was one more folder, labeled Echo, the same word I'd used for my private file. When I opened it, I saw photos of my house, my garage, my car, time-stamped logs of my movements, the routes I drove, even copies of the emails I'd sent to her. She'd been tracking me the entire time. A final document sat at the bottom. Disposition Plan, Subject E. Ward. It listed 2 options, neutralize or recruit. Next to recruit was a note. Potential asset. Understands systems, distrusts authority, useful for expansion. I slammed the laptop shut. For a long time I just sat there, heartbeat loud in the quiet room. Then I remembered something Reyes had said the first time we met. The truth isn't about who's guilty. It's about who gets to write the report. Now I knew what she meant. I copied everything to a new drive, encrypted it, and drove straight through the night to the state capitol. By sunrise, I was standing outside the Department of Public Oversight, the only agency Reyes didn't control. The clerk at the desk tried to turn me away until I said one word: fraud. Within minutes, I was in a conference room surrounded by suits and badges. They asked for proof. I handed them the drive. When the files loaded, the room went silent. The director read through the reports, face turning gray. He made a call. 2 more officials entered, whispering to each other. By noon, agents were already on their way to the Hale Group offices. By evening, news alerts filled every channel. State Task Force uncovers multi-county fraud network. Investigator linked to real estate scandal. Cedar Ridge hero provides key evidence. They didn't use my name, and I was fine with that. Reyes was arrested at a private airfield trying to leave the state. Vanessa surrendered the next morning. The network collapsed within a week. I stayed off-camera, off-grid. I'd done my part. When it was over, I drove back through Cedar Ridge. The sun was setting, the streetlights flickering on, the same quiet hum in the air as the day this all began. Lawns were trimmed, kids played, life had returned. For the first time in years, I parked the Charger without checking the mirrors. The garage door closed smooth and silent. I stood there for a while, breathing. The neighborhood had survived, and so had I. People would talk about what happened. The fraud, the arrests, the headlines. But they'd never know how close it all came to vanishing again. Because corruption doesn't die in daylight. It hides, waits, changes its name, but now I knew how to find it. The next morning, I opened a new file on my computer. No titles, no folders, just one name typed in the header, Echo 2, and for the first time, it was mine to write.